American Library Association podcast. We're in the podcast booth, and I'm with Steve Physioc, who's just completed a book, and it looks terrific. But before we get into that, I was talking to him a couple minutes earlier this morning and found out that he was the announcer for the Kansas City Royals. Is that right, Steve?
I was in broadcasting for 47 years as a college football, college basketball, and Major League Baseball announcer. The last 11 years was with the Kansas City Royals, but I had 7 years with ESPN, 26 with Fox Sports. But throughout my history, I always was a reader.
Okay.
And I wouldn't read sports books, I would read classics, whether it was Steinbeck or Hemingway, or in my opinion, my favorite author now is Diana Gabaldon of Outlander fame.
Yes.
And I've become friends with her, and I just think she is an incredible wordsmith. So as I got older and I continued to read while I was on the road, I just thought, can I write? So it was a different form of storytelling.
Right.
And I just fell in love with writing, and I've written 4 novels, the Walls of Lucca series, and then the Walks with the Wind series, and I'm working on my 5th novel right now, which is back the last year of World War II.
You obviously are hardworking when it comes to that. And I think people are always interested in knowing a little bit about your background. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write the Walls of Lucca? And I didn't know for sure what that was, so please tell us.
People may not believe this, but it started with a dream. I took my wife on vacation to Italy in 2006, and I had this vivid dream of a great walled city and 2 families struggling to produce this wine, and this woman coming up from the village to help them. And it was a vivid dream, and instead of going back to sleep, I went to the bathroom, wrote down the outline, and then my wife toured Italy, went to Florence and Venice, did all the touristy things, hiked the Cinque Terre, and then a week later, we're driving to meet 3 other couples in this town of Lucca. Never heard of it before, never seen it before. And
That's amazing.
As I'm driving in, I'm going, oh my gosh, Stacy, this is it. These are the walls that were in the dream. And if you drive around to the left, there'll be a little turret where you can drive into, and sure enough, that was the case. Well, because of that inspiration, I said, I got to read about the history of Lucca. So I bought a book about the history, and that was fascinating. So I just created the story and came up with a timeline of where I wanted my characters to come from. 2 families struggling to produce a wine in very difficult times. The World War I, the Spanish flu, the rise of fascism, Mussolini, so it's a love story / historical fiction. The Walls of Lucca takes place 1914 to 1930, and the sequel, Above the Walls, picks up in 1938 after Mussolini writes his manifesto of race solidifying his union with Hitler, and how that affects the citizens of Italy, the agriculture workers, and it too is a love story / historical fiction.
Oh, wow. I'm sitting here in awe. What the walls, what do they represent?
It's very interesting because Lucca at one time was the number 2 banking capital in all of Europe, and it was at the end of the silk trade. So they had a lot of money. So what do you have when you have a lot of money? You have fears. You have fears that someone are going to take that money away from you.
Yes,
so they built these walls.
Okay.
They have the pre-Christian walls, which you can no longer see, then the medieval walls, which were built in the 13th century, and then the walls today took 105 years to build.
When were they built?
They were built in the 15th and 16th century, and they're finished in the 16th century, and they're massive walls. Inside, you can take the soldiers from one side of the village to the other inside the walls. The walls are so thick you could drive a truck on now, and they were so sophisticated you could draw water from the Serchio River in and transfer it over and flood the plain. But the fascinating story is, in over 2,000 years, 3 different walls. The walls were never militarily tested. They spent millions of lira building these defensive walls to protect themselves when no one
ever tested it.
But that got into the psychobabble of my mind and thinking, Do we as human beings do the same thing ourselves? Do we build these invisible walls around us to keep us from being hurt from no one who's really trying to attack us? We're all going to have challenges in our life. We're all going to have, whether it's a disability or a health issue or a war. Well, it's how do you respond from that? And that's where my main character Isabella comes in.
That's an interesting connection. I would not have come up with that. But you know, when you mention it, it seems to make a lot of sense. Now, your protagonist, Isabella, she's a woman, apparently great spiritual conviction. Where did she come from?
Well, as I was telling you about the metaphor of the walls,
right.
She is a woman with incredible spiritual conviction that regardless of what takes place in her life, whether it's the war, whether it's losing her parents, she has raised her first 11 years as a pagan, which is a belief that God is found in the sun, the sky, the water, in nature. And her parents die with the influenza in the early 1900s, and she's transferred from an aunt to an uncle, and eventually to a very fundamental Catholic convent outside the walls of Lucca. In reality, it's called I changed the name to Blessings Convent.
Okay.
It has a different name in real life, but I wanted to protect the innocent nuns anyway. They were incredibly helpful during World War II. But Isabella has such this spiritual conviction that she starts her day in prayer, in meditation, to make sure her compass needle is at north when her day begins.
Okay.
And everyone she meets, she somehow affects them, and every other character has some form of unforgiveness they're going through. The wine owner, who is a rich wine owner, has had a challenge with his very oppressive father and how he has to forgive him. The wine owner's wife is unfaithful, and so he has a grievance against her. How do they come together?
Sure.
There's a young man, Franco, who goes off to World War I. He's a pacifist, but he's conscripted into the war, and he sees horror on the battlefield. He has to let that go, and the winemaker goes off to the war and is killed, and his wife is left with 4 children to run the vineyard, and she has some form of unforgiveness. So it takes, for some of them it takes 30 years, for some it only takes a few months, but very slowly Isabella, with this spiritual conviction, chips away at the walls, the defensive walls that are keeping them from coming together.
And that's the invisible walls that we have around us.
And coming from a sports background, I'm involved with team sports, and the beautiful thing that I watch every single time I've seen a championship, it's about young people, whether it's female athletes or male athletes, leaving their ego in the locker room and coming out and competing for the person next to them. And when I see that happen, and I saw it with our Royals in 2014-15, it was a physical awareness of seeing young people come together and play for each other, and amazing things can happen. As an example, the Royals that year finished last in home runs, last in walks, and won the World Championship. The only way you can do that is with unity, and I found that
teamwork.
I found the same thing true. The only way that these individuals could come together to produce a superior Sangiovese wine was to let go of their unforgivenesses, come together, and become a team.
So I was just going to ask similarities between that period of the 1920s and today, and you obviously do see similarities.
You do, and it's really interesting because when Mussolini came up through the ranks, here's a guy who preached family values, he preached fidelity, and yet he was carousing all over the country, unfaithful to his wife, cheating on her. He also had an insurrection. Ours was on January 6th. His was in October of 1922, and it was called the March on Rome. And before Adolf Hitler had his brown shirts, Mussolini had his black shirts, and they were thugs who went out and intimidated the press. He called them fake news, and he eventually would control the press. And so there were similarities to what is taking place in our country today, and that's why I love the American Library Association, because they're fighting to protect the ability to read.
Right. Now, are you here this afternoon to sign some books? Is that, or have you already done that?
I've already done that. I'd be more than happy to do it.
Do you expect
some more?
Be here for a while?
Sure. I mean, this is, like I said, I've done one thing for 47 years as a sports broadcaster. I've only been a writer for 15, and really,
you're loving every minute. Well, let's suppose that somebody says to you, where can I get a hold of more information about this guy? Do you have a website, or how do people find out more about you?
They can either go to Amazon and type in the Walls of Lucca, or they can type in my name, stevephysioc.com. I have my own webpage, and I have a weird last name. It's spelled Physioc. And
I will have to say you that once you learn it, you will never forget it.
I've had people say, well, why didn't you change your name to like in Hollywood?
Sam Schmuck.
Yeah. Well, my wife's maiden name is St. James, so Steve St. James would have sounded much better than Steve Physioc. But I've met so many interesting people and so many Physiocs because I didn't change it.
Good. Well, thank you very much, Steve. This has been really interesting. I'll have to say I knew nothing about that. And I think that the people listening will find out some very interesting things. And stop by the booth here or check out Steve's website and get some more information. And that's what we have today. We're with the American Library Association podcast. And from that podcast studio, we're signing off. And thanks again, Steve. We appreciate you being here.
Don, thank you very much, and I'll be hanging out by Headline Books. That's out by the post office.
Good.
Beth Coleman-Werner is a dear friend, and she has been an inspiration to my writing career. Thank you.
Yeah, and it's wonderful to have writing friends. It's just like that team you're talking about. You have a writing team. Okay, thanks again, Steve. It was great talking to you.
Thank you, Don.